The 63rd episode of RE0 is titled The Warrior's Commendation, a phrase that most obviously points to the conclusion of the main focal conflict between Garfiel and Kurgan. It's a moment which resolves some of the internal conflicts Garfiel has wrestled with this season, in particular, a misunderstanding he has about what it means to be a warrior. The other two conflicts involve archbishops, where battle chatter is par for the course. All of them seem to want to engage in conversation with their opponents around whatever their personal obsession may be. They love to yap, but primarily to extol their worldview or values. In stark contrast, Kurgan does not love to chatter, or perhaps is unable to, but he nevertheless says a lot throughout this fight against Garf. In his case, too, that silent conversation is all about the things he values. It is that unsaid dialogue between Kurgan and Garfiel that eventually gives the latter his breakthrough and rounds out some of our understanding at the same time. This episode explained things about Garfiel I didn't realize I'd missed in his characterization, and that always feels a little satisfying to me. Describing where I now believe Garfiel began the season, and what has changed is going to be the main thrust of our video today, after which I will discuss the interesting insights from the other two conflicts. But first, we'll continue to do a little Q&A from comments on the previous videos. A reminder to ask me anything, but restrain it to things that exist in the anime version of the story. I don't read sources, and we keep them and other external information out of our conversation around this series. So, thank you. Today I'll give two answers which have some overlap with one another, and once again I will combine some questions together. For the first, I'll take the second question from iHeartNJDevils3536. Of all the Sin Archbishops, who do you think would have the best chance at redemption, if even possible, and why? And then the similar question from Rem09580, do you think any of the Archbishops can be saved? If so, why and how? At the moment, I don't really expect salvation to be possible, at least in the sense of turning the existing Archbishops into saner ex-Archbishops, or in the sense of giving them a moment to change their stripes and help the candidates / hurt the cult. There was arguably a kind of redemption of Betelgeuse last episode, when Amelia feels the original juice in the touch of the unseen hand. But I'm guessing this isn't what these questions mean when referring to being saved or redeemed. I'll talk about why I don't expect it later. As to who is the most likely candidate, if they could, I think it's down to what qualities enable a person to change in the first place. Even if Regulus was still alive, he would be dead last on this list because he was incapable of changing. And he was incapable of changing because he cannot entertain the idea of being wrong. You'd need someone who could accept their own imperfection, someone who is at least a little introspective. For my money, that means that Betelgeuse would have been at the top of the list if he was still alive. He considered Subaru's words about what the witch would have wanted from him and ceased his self-flagellation, taking advice from a stranger when he thought it rang true. He was also curious about Subaru in multiple loops, admitting that he didn't understand who he was or why the witch's love so clung to him. Someone inquisitive like that, who can lead with their own ignorance, is a person who I think could change their mind, at least eventually. Of those who remain alive then, Sirius, I think, is the next closest. Though she goes about it in the wrong way, her desire to connect to other people feels like a genuine one. There's something she doesn't understand and is trying to learn. Her last unguarded moment with Priscilla in particular stands out to me. I think if Sirius could form a single normal relationship, that might create an inroad to effect a change, but that's a really big if. Because I think there is something of a curse to these witch factors. All the archbishops have these exaggerated opinions and mannerisms, myopic worldviews they build their entire identity around, and since it's common to all, I'm led to believe the witch factors are the source of this amplification. My best guess as to why this might be isn't due to their association with the deadly sins, but their association with Satila. To explain that, though, let's look at the next pair of questions, which are about the Witch of Envy. Wix4a states that Satila's behavior puzzles them. When she appears in the sanctuary, she's unstable and jealous. But when she appears again at the tea party, she's calm and doesn't seem to care that just a minute ago Subaru was talking with the witches. What do you think is the reason for the sudden change of behavior? And then Terrell Sam points out that the lore suggests that Satila killed and consumed the other witches, but we find out that Typhon is buried under the city. So, they ask if I think the other witches' fates might also have been amended throughout history in order to blame Sottila for their deaths. To be sure, a lucid Sottila crashing the witches' tea party was one of the most shocking things to happen in the whole series. For most of the first season, she's at best a disembodied shadowy hand and sinister presence. By the time of the white whale fight, she at least has a face, though we see little of it. And then we just get that single instance where Subaru brings up Return by Death while Betelgeuse is in his body, where she shows up as a shadowy outline and speaks for the first time, albeit in a cryptic manner. To that point, she seemed far more like an evil force or instinct than a person. The whole world being scared of her seems like an understandable position. When she manifests in the sanctuary, or whatever it is that happened there, we're a little light on explanation, she seems far more like a sapient being than an unknowable entity, but still one not quite in her right mind, and certainly no less sinister. She swallows the whole place in her shadow while simply repeating that she loves Subaru over and over. The only other reactions we get from her are when he says he'd have an easier time loving Echidna or any of the other witches, at which point she swallows him, and when he stabs himself with Petra's modified handkerchief, which causes her shock and grief. That reaction at least tells us that there's something in there that can feel, but to this point, she hasn't much seemed like something that can think. The tea party changes everything we understand about her. That isn't to say that we suddenly do. She's still this huge enigma, but other than the roiling miasma clinging to her, she seems not so different from the other 6 witches present. We'd heard that she'd killed and consumed the others, but the reactions to her presence are mixed. Echidna seems to hate her and had barriers to keep her out, and Carmela is genuinely afraid of her, but Sekhmet just refers to her as troublesome. Typhon is happy to see her, Daphne is happy to smell her, and Minerva basically defends her against Subaru's opening tirade. Even before we learn about Typhon drowning in a city-sized trap, the witch's behavior in her presence suggests that the story must be incomplete, for they do not all treat her as an enemy. In fact, learning it was Daphne and not Sottila who created the white whale already meant that the things people believe about the Witch of Envy are incorrect. It may be that very few of the things said about Sottila will turn out to be true, or at least the full story, but what does that mean? A sloppy historical record? Or a deliberate attempt to stick her with the blame? Just the fact that people using the word witch in that world are always referring to Sottila means that knowledge of other witches is obscured by her fearsome legend. This may make little difference to the 6 who are dead, but any other witches still active in the world essentially have a smokescreen. And to me, that seems like a really good reason to massage the stories so that all blame points to Sottila. At this point, we only know of one possible living witch, but she's also the one with memory and reality rewriting powers, which seems like just the toolkit one might favor for a little history rewriting as well. That said, it's not all fabricated. She really is a silver-haired half-elf, and does appear to be sealed rather than dead. Certainly the way she swallowed the sanctuary in shadow tracks with Betty's story of her draining half the world dry, a figure to inspire widespread fear. Her threatening Subaru's heart when he begins to mention Return by Death, and outright killing Emilia when he does so, also tracks with the common picture of an evil and unknowable menace. But the Sottila in Echidna's Castle of Dreams isn't just lucid, she's kind, she's vulnerable, she's emotionally intelligent. She seems utterly incapable of doing the things we've seen or heard of in the outside world. That contrast and the confusion it causes us is deliberately invoked. It's a mystery for us to chew on as we await further clues. So with what we have now, this is my best guess. I think the key is that miasma. Inside the mental space of Echidna's castle, it's just a spooky particle effect, but in the real world, I think it must indicate something like madness or another kind of taint. There are 2 instances when we see something that is visually similar. The first is in Ruzu's memories of the sanctuary's founding, when a threat named Hector appears. He is cloaked in something that is similar, though not exactly the same. Roz calls him Devil of Melancholy, a name that he hates. By way of explanation, he asks if Roz thinks he ended up like that because he wanted to. They don't get into the specifics, but Roz asserts his situation is due to the choices he made, that he shouldn't dare play the victim. To me, that implies Hector is afflicted in some way, and I'm just guessing that the glow surrounding him represents that affliction. He doesn't seem too out of his mind, So maybe the visual difference between him and Sattila is one of severity. Maybe with time, his would darken and increase to resemble hers, with his mind likewise receding. The other instance is when Emilia believes that Subaru abandoned her because someone intercepted his letter explaining his trip to the mansion. Her mind really has broken in this instance, and to visually represent it, her irises are filled with a familiar, swirling black and purple fire. This is circumstantial evidence, I'll grant. But madness or some other confusing taint could easily explain the discrepancy between the loving and tender Sattila at the tea party and the one on the outside or in the legends. She may have physically carried out atrocities, yet without actually understanding what she was doing. This would also explain her request to Subaru, that he one day come to her and kill her. Whatever this cursed effect is, she can't be rid of it, and death at least will prevent her from causing any further woe. This then leads back to the first set of questions. We're missing a lot of steps between the time when Sattila caused trouble and the eventual creation of the witch's cult, but there is some association there. I think it's entirely possible that the stories about Sattila consuming the other witches are references to the extracted witch factors, and it's only after Sattila is sealed that they are held by the various archbishops. If Sattila was tainted with something and held those factors at one time, then maybe whatever afflicts her has tainted them as well, and it is this unfortunate sequence of events that causes the archbishops to slip from sanity, which is also why I'm dubious as to whether any saving or redeeming of the cultist is possible. If Sattila believes she must be killed, then that doesn't really sound very hopeful for a cure. At least, that's the best I've got with the scarce information at hand. But what the miasma really represents, and why it has a scent that Daphne and her mob beasts crave, has come up enough that I do expect an eventual answer. Considering Sattila's nature in the tea party, I'm inclined to believe it was good intentions gone awry, or even some kind of deception. At the very least, it isn't something return by death could fix, which is why I also favor some kind of mental affliction for right now. After all, the cast of the series is no stranger to being their own worst enemies, so let's return to the episode to discuss Garfiel's internal strife. Garfiel in Season 2 started out as a sometimes antagonistic but always troubled boy trapped by his past, who both wants to free the sanctuary and is terrified of what that would mean. When he eventually allows himself to be reconciled to the events around his mother's departure, he not only gains peace of mind, but takes on a new identity as someone supporting Emilia and Subaru in her quest for the throne. The first test of that purpose comes when he reveals he is not bound by the barrier after all, and can join the mission to thwart Elsa and Mei Li's assault on the mansion. He even dusts off the arm guards we had seen hanging in Ruzu's place as a symbol of this fresh start, saying he was already the strongest there is, but with these he'd be even stronger. He will ultimately be the one to kill the unkillable Elsa, which at the time seemed like an important triumph, ending her murderous existence. When we joined Garfiel in this new season, however, we discovered that the encounter with Elsa seems to plague him. It troubles him in some way that he doesn't articulate, or perhaps doesn't know how to. This manifests alongside a new internal crisis. Garfiel wants to be the strongest, and running into Reinhard throws a little cold water over that ambition. But it turns out that Garf has a particular metric for what being the strongest means. This is the lie he tells himself, the false picture he wants to make true. And so, let us build that picture of him first. You could be forgiven for having forgotten that Garfiel has a divine protection of earth spirits, for even with the many scraps he got into during the second season, he uses it sparingly. I think I might now say that he uses it reluctantly. Garf is this world's version of a chuny, always peppering his speech with references and idioms, most of which we don't have much context for. But in the ones we do, I think we can see a pattern of his preoccupation with great historical figures and warriors. He invokes Hoshin in an idiom referencing how the legendary traitor brought down a nation. He invokes Reed, the master swordsman, and even uses an idiom featuring Reinhard. Garf studies these figures he wants to emulate. Using references to them is his way of feeling like he is associated with their greatness. Kurgan is one such admired figure. The moment the idea of animated dead warriors is introduced, Garf immediately knows who the taller masked cultist must be. Later that same night, though only shown now, we'll see him explain Kurgan to Subaru, why he became a legendary figure. Crucially to our understanding of Garf, though, is the context he provides about demi-humans. They ordinarily have a high aptitude for magic, and that includes Garf. The Kurgan's many-armed race are something of an exception, so even in the Wallachia Empire where demi-humans are protected, they were outsiders and faced discrimination. Wilhelm also supplies that Kurgan's 8 arms instead of 4 or 5 ostracized him further still within his tribe, an outcast among outcasts among outcasts. Despite this, he fought for his race, became their champion, and changed the way his people were treated in the Empire. And he did all that without the usual demi-human advantage of aptitude for magic. I have to imagine Garfiel feels some kinship with Kurgan. We can infer that demi-humans are subject to discrimination in the Kingdom of Lagunica, something he is well aware of, as one of the reasons he was apprehensive about opening Sanctuary's barrier to the outside. But Garf is not exactly demi-human himself, being 3/4 human. He doesn't actually have a place with demi-humans or humans, an outcast among outcasts. Like Kurgan, then, the best person to rely upon is himself, and becoming strong enough to manage everything on his own was his original goal and ultimate downfall in the second season. While he has gotten past the lone wolf act, I suspect that this admiration for Kurgan and other warriors who carve their name into history goes a long way to explain how rarely Garfiel reaches for his divine protection. There is also an amusing scene that might contribute to his desire to be strong in a specific way. I don't know if he still crushes on Rom, but back when he did, and they were in conflict, Garfiel faces her in his fully transformed state, but she is completely unbothered, strolls up to him, and knocks his block off. In fact, she asks if he's ever once beaten her in a punch-out, rhetorically implying that no, he has not, and she then proceeds to demonstrate how past exchanges of blows have fared for him. For a 13-year-old boy priding himself on his strength, being bested by this slip of a girl in straight pugilism probably smarts a bit, probably motivates him to reach a point where it will not be so. That, then, is Garf's starting point this season for how he views himself. He maintains wearing the arm guards, in fact had to replace them after the fight with Elsa, and has styled himself as Amelia's Shield, a nickname that even Reinhard has heard. We also see him give his name as Gorgeous Tiger to the kids he rescues. These two names put focus on the ideas he wants associated with him: a shielding, unyielding presence on the battlefield, symbolized by the arm guards, and the overpowering strength of his transformation, symbolized by a tiger. He wants to be renowned, but in a specific way, and his actual name, Garfiel Tinzel, isn't it. Now to return to Elsa. Because of Subaru's time looping, the only person Garf killed that he remembers is the vampire assassin. The circumstances of that fight, how it resolved, and the fact that he's just 13 when taking her life have apparently tangled his mind into knots. I'm not sure Lagunica has a concept of therapy in the first place, but Garf also seems the type to avoid sharing this kind of internal trouble. Whether the Elsa he sees is part of a vivid imagination or something else, it doesn't matter too much for examining the pattern of her appearance. Adding them together with this episode, I believe she manifests in his moments of uncertainty. Our introduction to her apparition follows just after Garf is troubled over meeting Reinhard, and she simply piles more doubt on his head. It was pure chance that he managed to kill her. Essentially, he's not actually that strong. She did have him dead to rights, in fact, and he was saved by her momentary distraction of concern for Mei Li, which he then also uses to get the drop on her. Biting her neck seems like it must have turned off her invincibility, but that was not something he did knowing it would work. There is something to what she is saying, then, an actual uncertainty in his mind. She likewise appears when he flees from his mother's house after her new husband comes home, and when he and Mimi are being overmatched by the 2 corpse soldiers, and when Kurgan was getting the upper hand in an earlier part of their fight. Her 2 appearances in this episode are consistent with this trend, but end up being rather enlightening in a new direction. The first is when he's attacked by the demi-beasts, and the part of him that knows they are transformed humans gives him pause. That pause is visually represented by time stopping while she appears to articulate this thought, the unresolved question. He would kill them then? These once humans? Is that who he is? But the other part of that vision is Elsa suddenly behind him, having driven her dagger into his back. This hesitation is a vulnerability. His uncertainty makes him a weaker warrior. The second appearance also involves demi-beasts, but this time Elsa takes the place of the charging attacker. Garf simply dodged out of the way of the first group, but this time his half-siblings are cowering behind him, To save them, he will have to kill, and because of the vision, it means he effectively will have to kill Elsa, not the beast. It's at this point that we get something of a reveal. Garf flashes back to 3 scenes: the moment he jumped Elsa while she was distracted, the moment they bite each other, and the moment she is crushed and ultimately killed. Those specific choices tell me that Garf feels something like confused guilt over taking Elsa's life. He isn't remembering her crimes or what he was protecting, he's dwelling on the actions he took to kill her at the very moment he is having to decide if he will effectively kill her again. The idea that Garf has some mixed up and unresolved feelings about killing Elsa led me to go back and re-examine their fight in a new light. Why might Garf feel guilt, or at least some confusion about whether he did the right thing? If you recall, Elsa isn't much different from the archbishops in that she likes a little battle chatter, but her particular brand is a kind of sadistic flirtation. For her, there is a kind of intimacy to the killing, disemboweling process. She compliments his fighting, but does so in her breathy, seductress way, which he picks up on, saying that hearing that from anyone but Ram doesn't make him feel happy. She relishes the pain he inflicts, that it makes her feel alive. She proclaims that she finds him so very endearing. There is a kind of excitement and connection she gets from all this that isn't the kind of battle enthusiasm he is used to or engages in himself, and I think these antics are somewhat confusing for him. He'll reveal he's figured out she's a vampire, and he knows one of the witches was a vampire. If she's dead, then it means Elsa can die too. But rather than make that just a threat or banter, he seems to offer mercy. If she swears she'll never do bad shit again, he might just let her off the hook. This instead prompts her to share her backstory in brief. An orphan in a bitter cold northern country who hurt and stole from people to stay alive. No thoughts of being happy until a day came when a shopkeeper caught her. And Garf tries to interrupt her story. Perhaps he doesn't want to hear anything that would humanize her, make her more than just an enemy. But she ignores him and explains about the shopkeeper removing her clothes and her stabbing him with a shard of glass. It was a transformative moment for her, the warm blood and innards against the biting cold. As she puts it, if there is happiness in this world, it is the warmth that makes one forget the cold. It was the first happiness she ever found. A somewhat messed up story considering what it led to, but there is a pitiable quality to it. For Elsa, the disemboweling of victims to get to their warm insides is associated with happiness. Combining that with her flirtatious banter leading up to the act suggests to me that killing others is part of how she makes connections to other people, twisted and fleeting as it may be. As she says, "My love for you will begin after I kill you, Garfiel Tinzel." If this bizarre form of affection wasn't confusing enough for Garf, the last part of their struggle is oddly intimate as well. He pins her and bites her neck, and she bites right back, and for a moment they writhe on the floor together. Even the choice of framing charges the scene with sensuality. He jumps off her and goes to crush her with the rock piggy corpse, but she essentially sits there to take it, still reveling in the blood and warmth of the fight. So, yeah, I believe if I went through that while 13 years old, I might have a touch of trouble processing it. Elsa's history makes it plain she had little chance at a normal life, and as bizarre and murderous as it was, she did want to connect to Garf. Offering to let her go might suggest he really didn't want to kill her, but when he does finally do so, she rather passively accepts it, and he isn't sure how he's supposed to feel about any of that. So, that completes our starting picture of Garfiel, troubled over the life he took in the past, and determined to be strong in a specific way. Just in time for Kurgan to crap all over him as a warrior by facing him with only part of his strength. I realize that these corpse soldiers must be compelled to fight, that they are not exercising free will in the usual sense, but some part of their original personality must remain. Wilhelm was confident Teresia would seek him out, and he's the one with experience from the demi-human war. I believe Kurgan's case supports this as well. When Garfiel is knocked out briefly after crashing through the floors, Kurgan waits on him to continue the fight rather than killing him while defenseless. And when Kurgan enters the damaged shelter, he closes the hole behind him, preventing it from filling with water and drowning those within. There's an assessment and judgment process there, and so I think we can believe that he is likewise assessing and judging Garf's worthiness the way his original self would have. At first, he is not impressed. Garf hesitates when confronted with the demi-beasts, jumping out of the way, but Kurgan kills them with no moments or thoughts spared. The look he gives Garf might very well be disapproving. And then the way Garf tries to fight him is consistent with his idea of how to be strong. He's fully transformed and attempts to overwhelm Kurgan with raw power. Kurgan turns the tables on him not by being stronger, but with technique, utilizing his extra arms to stun Garf, grapple him into a throw, and then strike him when he's on the ground. The flashback to the conversation with Subru and Wilhelm is intercut into their fight at this point, and plants the information about his 4 devil cleavers and how Kurgan will only draw all 4 against opponents he recognizes as worthy. As he pointedly does not do so, Garf understands that he is being judged lacking, at least going by what he's demonstrated so far. But Kurgan's opinion will shift just as the way Garf fights begins to shift. He starts using his divine protection, and in a tactical manner. Garf might have idolized Kurgan for his strength, but their scrap suggests to me that he has a good mind for melee tactics as well, and maybe that is what Garf should have idolized instead. For example, cutting a slice out of the pillar Garf created, throwing it face on to push Garf back and obscure his vision, and then leading with punches to break the barrier, while a different arm is winding up a sword strike to land at the moment he makes the opening, giving Garf almost no chance to see it coming. A desperate use of his divine protection saves Garf and sends their fight into a new arena. Here we return to the demi-beast that appears as Elsa, and he is asked once more to kill someone that at least started out as an innocent victim of circumstance. Though momentarily conflicted, he manages to do it. Perhaps understanding that the alternative means letting others die makes the choice plain. There are moments when it's okay for a warrior to kill. The exchange he has with the Phantom in his mind suggests he might be moving past this hang-up as well, countering her statement of loving him to say that he doesn't love her. And in fact, you aren't even her. It's entirely possible that he is also rejecting the idea that he might become like her, that killing doesn't make him a killer. He doesn't love her or fight for the reason that she does. When Kurgan enters the shelter afterwards, Garf prepares to square up with him once more. And to his surprise, Fred starts calling out his gorgeous tiger moniker. Garf is confused at what's happening at first, until the rest of the civilians take up the chant. He protected them from the demi-beast, and is putting himself between them and the new threat as well. They are designating him their champion and cheering him on. This is when Kurgan makes his reassessment. He'd already seen Garfiel use his magic at this point, of fighting with whatever he has at his disposal. He notes the dead demi-beast, so Garf must have moved past his reluctance to kill when needed as well. And then he notes Garf, demi-human in a kingdom that discriminates against them, nevertheless being cheered as their champion, a role he once fulfilled himself. And so, out come the swords. One might argue that praise from an enemy is more meaningful than praise from an ally. For it to come from someone Garfiel considers a legend as well must go a long way to assuage his uncertainty over his worthiness as a warrior. In fact, he goes to give his name in the honorable way of a duel, but he stops himself from falling back on the ultimate shield bit, and pivots instead to Gorgeous Tiger Garfiel Tenzel, reclaiming his true name as the one he takes pride in. This round of the fight goes differently, for we now have a Garf who understands that there is a time and place to kill, a Garf who has people he needs to protect and who cheer him on, and a Garf who is no longer reluctant about using his magic for advantage. After all, if Kurgan honors him so, then it must be perfectly honorable for him to use all talents in their fight. We're not going to break down this extensive and impressive fight choreography, except to say that I enjoy how much perspective and distortion is utilized to help put us in the same state of chaotic claustrophobia that Garfiel is experiencing. Things like this shot to show how Kurgan's bulk fills his vision, or the fisheye effect when he is trying to regroup. Now that Garf is unrestrained in his use of divine protection, he manages to fight tactically as well, obscuring Kurgan's vision, creating multiple pillars to nullify the extra arms, and generally becoming a more confident and aggressive combatant. For all that, Kurgan is still a legend for a reason, and 2 blows appear to sever the tendons in one arm and shatter the bone in the other, destroying the arm guards in the process. It goes from an 8-on-2 arm fight to an 8-on-0 arm fight, but Garf still has tricks in store, using his power to launch up and over Kurgan, who is unable to intercept him due to an earlier attack that damaged his arm as well. And I feel that there is a key idea here about Garfiel as a warrior, represented by the stylized tiger that appears as he rises up. The actual tiger he can transform into isn't nearly as intimidating or tiger-like as this Garfiel, using everything at his disposal and continuing the fight without working arms. In fact, the arm guards that give him his ultimate shield identity are no more at this moment as well. He uses the power again to ricochet back at the occupied Kurgan, and rather appropriately bites his neck as he flies past, a little echo to the fight with Elsa. This is the truth of Garfiel as a warrior. At no point in this final bout does Garf transform, even partially. The lie is behind him. Kurgan speaks for the only time to commend him, and then breaks apart into so much blue dust. These are not corpses in the usual sense, then. Perhaps greater than his victory, though, is Garfiel gaining a new perspective on what he can be as a warrior, and confronting the confused feelings he'd harbored over killing Elsa. His half-siblings fussing over him remind us that he has just one more hang-up to address this season, his amnesiac mother, but I suspect this new Garfiel will find that far easier to confront. Let's briefly visit the other conflicts in the episode, beginning with Lai Batankaitos. We'll pick up where we left off, replaying Otto summoning the water dragons to attack the Archbishop. While I believe we will eventually address both gluttonies we've met in an episode of their own, this encounter advances our understanding of what to expect in 3 ways. The first is Felt's mention of a powerful meteor stashed at the inn, something acquired from a nameless sorcerer. It is apparently powerful enough that even Reinhard would not escape unscathed, and I find it amusing to consider that Romji might have specifically been looking for something that would work on him. He wasn't too pleased to learn about his association with Felt, after all. Whether this impressive billing will prove accurate or deceptive marketing, we'll have to wait and see. But as Felt gets away, we now anticipate said meteor showing up later in the story. The second thing is simply a demonstration of the threats that Lai poses. This is pure horror genre technique at work here, keeping the fight with the water dragons off-screen. We get the terror of the one trying to escape, the sound effects of struggle, and our imagination fills in the carnage taking place. This builds dread more effectively than simply showing the slaughter, and the shot of Lai blood-splattered and grinning maniacally over his prey enhances the effect. He will not be so easily dealt with. A third thing, then, is a comment Lai makes which all but confirms the third gluttony we had predicted to exist, bearing part of the name we most expected them to have. Lai references a Rui who might like 3 among this party, and in context this seems similar to his own comments about his preferences as a gourmand. To refresh, we'd expected a third gluttony after Roy showed up with the last name of Alphard. That is a star in the constellation of Hydra, to go with Lai's last name pointing towards a star in the constellation Cetus, the whale. As there are 3 great maw beasts, and Lai is obviously associated with the white whale, Roy must be associated with one of the other 2. As the Hydra in mythology is a many-headed serpent, Roy most likely points to the great serpent maw beast, though as the mythological creature also regenerated severed heads, I guess there is an off chance it references the replicating great rabbit instead. If the former, then the remaining constellation of Lepus to match the Great Rabbit is the most likely match, and the prominent star there is named Arneb. If it's the latter, then perhaps the Serpens constellation is the other match, with the prominent star Eunuchelhe. I do expect it to be Arneb, though. Rui was likewise predictable from the pattern of Lai and Roy, at least for the Japanese speakers in our community. I'm pronouncing their names the way they are romanized in the subtitles, but that's because I have a lot of trouble with the actual Japanese sounds they both use when it comes at the beginning of a word. Their names are actually closer to Rai and Roy, seen here written in katakana. The Japanese equivalent to alphabetical order puts the 5 vowel sounds in the order A, I, U, E, O. That means the 2 names we know are first and last, and so the middle U sound seems like the most likely choice to round out the set. Of course, this pattern might also mean a 4th and 5th gluttony, giving us a Ri and a Re, but I have no idea what the star names would be in that case, as we are fresh out of Great Maw Beast to guide us. At any rate, actually name-dropping a 3rd gluttony suggests to me that they may show up this season, and are perhaps somewhere in the city right now. As they've been kept carefully off stage, I'd expect their appearance to come at a particularly bad time. Some kind of surprising gut punch that is no longer completely from left field, thanks to Lai's offhand comment. Finally, 2 of the characters I find the most interesting clashed far underground where no one else can witness their exchange. And for a moment, I thought we weren't going to witness it either. I know the series has obscured a lot of Al's actions to help stoke audience interest in his mystery, and I wouldn't have been surprised to see none of his conflict with Coppola. But when it begins, and all we see are the shadows of their fight, I felt like the series was trolling me, technically showing it, but not really giving us what we want. Once we actually saw them, and not just their shadows, it confirmed the series was trolling me, knowing full well what my reaction to the shadow fighting would be. Would have made for great live reaction content if Crunchyroll hadn't botched the episode release, forcing me to cancel our usual stream. Now, at least we do manage a little insight into Al from the scene without giving away the whole game. For starters, we see him use earth magic, as that is what the Dona designation indicates. We saw it once before when Betelgeuse cast an earthen shield around himself. This by itself might be enough to upend all the theories about Al being a Subaru from the future, since Subaru's gate is wrecked and he has shadow affinity besides. Though I confess there aren't enough established hard rules of magic to suggest that this is definitive proof. Anyway, we can also note that Al's usage of this magic is tactical in nature, a supplement to his other combat prowess rather than his main tool. The first instance summons a giant pillar seemingly to crush one of Coppola's extended, lion-headed arm thingies, but is actually obscuring her vision, as he appears behind the nearest column when she runs past to pursue him. It's possible he used some kind of technique or incredible physicality to pull this off, but we didn't see it any more than she did. The second instance follows close behind, as he thrusts his sword into the now headless body and casts an earth spell inside her or within his sword or something. It blows her apart, but with purpose, as in a wider shot we can see that he did so in a way that kept any of the cursed dragon blood from falling on him. Hey, this guy is pretty good. And it seems he's well aware. Easily my favorite exchange in all of this is after Coppola propositions him and he goes to refuse. He doesn't just want to turn her down, though. He wants to mock her at the same time, and so puts on an act that is part earnest apology, part bashful schoolgirl. But to really sell the bit, he needs a free hand. Since he only has the one, he must first sheath his sword. That's right. Despite being locked in a mortal struggle with a regenerating archbishop of the witches' cult, Al is confident enough to go momentarily unarmed purely to deliver a more effective insult. And even that might still be strategy. He seems to know that winding her up is an effective approach. Early in the fight, he calls her regeneration disgusting, and she cried foul. That's not something you dare call a girl. Later he'll give what I think is his real opinion, that he doesn't like or hate her, but then amends his response to say that, oh, he does hate her because she's disgusting, that her breath stings his eyes, provoking her on purpose. That's what begins the sequence where he ultimately beheads her and explodes her body. So I fully believe he was throwing her off her game with smack talk to set up what he hoped would be a decisive victory. Of course, turnabout is fair play, and Coppola attempts to wind him up as well. At first by accusing him of being the person who opened the floodgates, and the one who killed the council members before she could reach them. While he feigns ignorance, I'm inclined to believe Coppola's intuition is on the mark. It's what I already suspected anyway, but among the archbishops, she seems like the one with the firmest grasp on reality. If anyone is the brains of this operation outside of the Gospels, I think it has to be her. Her other attempt is especially enlightening, the sequence where she methodically transforms herself into Priscilla. When Al demands to know where she saw the princess, she replies that she's never seen her or been aware of her. Instead, she built a simulacrum of her from Al's gestures, reactions, and bearing. The implication is that she did the same thing to transform into Emilia and Kruge in the earlier instances. In those cases, it was instantaneous, yet this takes a little time and a little trial and error. I imagine this is down to Al's face being hidden behind his helmet. Facial expressions are the most useful clues for this little witch factor parlor trick of hers, though she does eventually get there all the same. At least I'm pretty sure this is the witch factor at work. After all, Carmilla changed herself into Rem, but seemingly without knowing who she appeared as to Subaru any more than Coppola knew who she was emulating. But this also neatly answers questions I had about the earlier examples. Coppola's versions of Emilia and Kruge are both very close, but not exactly right. Kruge is bandaged, but bears no evidence of the dragon blood's effects, and Emilia's outfit is absent several details. If these images are pulled from Felis and Subaru respectively then, it must mean that these are the versions in their heads. Felis sees a version of Kruge unblemished by the cursed blood, and Subaru, well, apparently doesn't pay much attention to the finer points of fashion. I am amused that one of the things absent from Amelia's get-up is Roswell's coat of arms that usually adorns her sleeves. That at least feels like a bit of commentary. There's another curiosity in this as well. Coppola asserts that she is transforming into the form that should be exactly in line with his preferences, and actually seems to really want him to react to her that way, wants to be looked at, desired. Perhaps that is true in the case of Al, and we can assume it's on the mark for Subaru, but that seems like a reveal if we apply the same logic to Felis. I hadn't pegged his love and dedication to Kruge as the romantic kind. It's even the subject of a joke back in the seasonal premiere. Is this insight into Felis? Maybe even something he doesn't know about himself? Or is this instead a misunderstanding on Coppola's part? Is the actual power to transform into someone the other person loves, and she simply conflates love with lust? Carmela, for her part, was sent to dote on Subaru, and who she transformed into was indeed someone Subaru loves and had been comforted by, but not someone he appears to desire. I don't have a confident answer for this, but I did want to bring up the possibilities as I see them. As befits everything involving Al, though, we leave things between the two unresolved. He can't figure out how to overcome her regeneration, and both her psychological and physical attacks on him are getting her nowhere. I most expect something happens to break up this fight, or she escapes to get back to her real purpose, as we have already seen a lot more of this than I ever thought we would. One last thing that I won't make its own section. The stinger indicates that we're going to return to Wilhelm and Teresia's fight, so I imagine we will also get some movement on the entire Austria family drama, possibly involving Reinhard and/or Heinkel. Wilhelm's statements to Teresia indicate that he does not consider the person he is fighting to really be his wife. He will not dream, this is reality. He calls her beautiful, which is why she should not exist here. To me, this says that she really did age normally. This version of Teresia, looking little different from the girl he married, is therefore something abnormal, something that shouldn't exist. I don't know if this is him trying to convince himself that he isn't holding back, or simply talking himself into not doing so, but I feel like it does preclude Wilhelm from trying to make some kind of connection. And I bring that up because of the fight with Kurgan. At the very end, he spoke, and then immediately collapsed. Was he defeated because Garf's bite was a fatal wound? Simple as that. Or did the fact that Garf molded himself into a worthy opponent to defeat Kurgan somehow affect the corpse soldier spell? Did that act snap Kurgan's personality out of his compulsion, allowing him to speak, and it's actually a regaining of himself that causes the body to collapse? A sample size of 1 isn't really enough to tell, but I thought we'd consider the possibility going into the fight with Teresia in case something similar plays out. We'll find out soon enough, so see you next week.